Reason magazine, yes, it's called Reason, is a libertarian magazine that ran this issue targeted at gamers. It boldly proclaimed that all libertarians should play video games, and this idea stemmed from their 2014 survey on gamers' political views. The survey focused on people who identify themselves as gamers, not simply people who play video games. The report says, quote, "Gamers may describe themselves as liberal, but they do not like government policies that control individual life choices, like what products they can purchase or consume." The study showed that 55% of gamers identified as independent politically, and liberal in views by 32%, a narrow margin over conservative and moderate. However, the other findings of the study seem to show that gamers tend to lean unconsciously toward the libertarian end of things. The article says, "For every single poll question where we asked whether the government should allow people to own, consume, or use certain products or services that are currently a focus of debate, gamers are more likely to say yes than non-gamers." Gamers showed in this study that they are more likely to deny government intervention in domestic affairs, or at least deny it in the ones they asked about. Yeah, if you're skeptical, that's justified. Let's keep in mind that Reason is so libertarian that their slogan is, quote, "free minds and free markets." However, the sampling method and the way they distinguish between gamers and non-gamers seems sound enough. They used random digit dialing to select people for the sample, and whether or not they identified as a gamer was simply one of the questions in the survey. They did not sample gamers and non-gamers separately, nor did they sample readers of their magazine, who would very likely be libertarian. But there is another Gamers and Politics survey conducted by Ipsos for the Entertainment Software Association. This study was not conducted on people who refer to themselves as gamers, but rather people who claim to play video games 3 to 4 hours a week. This likely affected the results to have a wider spread, as gaming is a deeply rooted part of culture today. However, still, 61% advocated for cutting programs and spending, a very libertarian and conservative idea. But the survey is not helpful, because it did not consider anything other than left and right, no combinations of the two like libertarianism. So, while Reason certainly has its bias, their methodology is more balanced, and they distinguish between gamers and people who play video games. I want to focus on those gamers, to answer why they are libertarian on average, and what that does to games as a medium. In my last video about Overwatch, I focused on the unique experience each player has in every round of the game, but there's more to the interaction games have with players than just that. Games, from their very inception, have always tried to foster a sense of personal achievement, feelings of worth, and self-determination. A game may have one or all of these things, but regardless, these all tie into what I'm referring to as individualism. Libertarians are all about being independent, forging your own path, finding your own purpose and worth, and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps so as to achieve something by your own hard work. In essence, not only is individualism something for libertarians, it's also something for gamers, because it's the way games are made. If we take a look back at video games, we can see that a key aspect has always been the personal achievements of the player, and in doing so, individualism. The original Legend of Zelda opens with the character dropped into the world and told to explore. The game is, at its core, about the personal journey you, the player, have as Link. And creator Shigeru Miyamoto has told us this. It's about your exploration of this world and discovery of its secrets. It's about growing in power with self-determination, in that you decide where Link goes first and what upgrades he gets. The game's openness promotes a strong sense of freedom and individuality that has been only expanded upon with the series' most recent release. Beyond Zelda, any RPG prides itself on its individuality. In the Elder Scrolls and Fallout, you create your own character and determine your own path. You can follow the main story, but you don't have to, and oftentimes you don't. As you level up, you develop a strong sense of personal achievement, watching your warrior or wastelander grow more powerful and have more experiences. You get to choose what kind of person you are, from a sneaky wastelander in Fallout to an archmage at the College of Winterhold. And let's not forget self-worth. It's unavoidable in a role-playing game for the story to not give the player a tremendous responsibility and value to the game world. Games as a medium tend to be far more focused on its audience than any other medium, by the very nature of it requiring player interaction. They almost always do this by fostering individuality, and when they don't, people get angry at the game. I remember discussing the game That Dragon Cancer with someone, and instantly when I brought up the game I heard the phrase, "Oh, that's not a game. After further discussion, I learned that this person, along with many other people, defines a game based on these encouragements of individualism, something that Dragon Cancer has none of, since it is essentially a tour through a gallery of life. I could spend all day on examples, but it's safe to say that games tend to foster individualism, and have for a long time. Now, libertarianism prides itself on its ability to be independent of others and from government, and throughout history, games either take their hands off and let the player determine their own path, or they create the illusion in linear games that you as the player are acting of your own volition, because obviously linear games can't be open. Usually, what are considered better games are ones that let you have a tremendous amount of freedom and varied activities if they are open world, or sell their linear illusion through player investment and personal growth. Today, we also see that the most hyped games to come out are the ones that are more open than ever. So it seems like no coincidence then that the statistics show us that gamers lean toward the libertarian and individualistic end of things. On average, since generally developers are held to the same standards which libertarians hold governments to. I find that this quote from the Hearthstone streamer Kerparian really sums up an exaggerated but still pretty accurate view of how gamers view developers.
In really any game, you should be able to control the experience that you desire from that game.
While he is generalizing really badly, this is the type of mindset and thinking that we oftentimes see from gamers, though it's usually expressed through actions and not normally said as frankly as this. This desire for no limitations lines up quite well with how libertarians would view government. It would not be out of the ordinary to hear libertarians say that you should be able to control the experience you desire from government, and they would generally say this pretty validly. Furthermore, like libertarians, gamers do not like what they generally would consider to be developers overstepping their rights so as to limit the players. This can be seen with the outcry over DRM, with many people believing that when you own a product, you can do what you please with it. A libertarian would say the same thing about any possession. When it is owned, the government should not regulate it so much as they normally do. We also see this with the controversy over on-disc DLC and always online features, using the argument that developers do not have the right to restrict content behind paywalls or an internet connection. In a similar way, libertarians are against anything they view as government overstepping its boundaries. It must be stressed that having a problem with always online or DRM is certainly not a bad thing, but it does create a view of game companies that runs parallel to what libertarians would say about governments. Truly, the gamer view and the libertarian view are not that different from one another. Of course, gamers focus on games while libertarians focus on the political well-being of a country, but it should not be surprising that reason found gamers to line up with libertarian viewpoints. There is nothing inherently wrong with individualism or those who believe in it, but I do see a problem with limitations of artists. I'm going to sound like a pretentious art nerd, but you've made it through this much of the video, so stick with me. Putting unnecessary restrictions on any artistic medium sets it back. We've seen this before back in 1934 when Hays Code was established on film. These censorship guidelines were in a way culturally enforced in that their establishment was promoted by concerned citizens. Prior to the code, films could do whatever they wanted, and while there were some films that were perhaps inappropriate, the medium itself flourished because people could experiment without too much fear of backlash. When we hold developers of games today by certain standards of what a game is and isn't, what a game can and can't do, or how a developer should or should not behave, we limit designers of the games to move the medium forward. Governments certainly owe people things, but developers don't. Holding developers to a standard that governments are held to does nothing but discourage forward mobility in games as a medium. Oftentimes the phrase, "keep your politics out of my games," is thrust around to discourage developers from making strong political statements. However, I propose that we don't keep politics out of games themselves, because political statements can be powerfully said with games, but rather take them out of the standards with which we hold developers. If we give developers more freedom to experiment with games, they may not make the games to your personal preference, but the ideas they put into their games may serve as a muse to a different developer who adapts that idea and then implements it, maybe even making your new favorite game. If there is a simple truth about art, experimentation moves mediums and creators forward. So I humbly ask the gamers, the gaming community, the people who spend hours and hours invested in these communities, give risks a chance, and go easy on those who take them when they fail. It will drive games forward, and I can promise you that.